Shalom. First and foremost, I want to give all praises to the Heavenly Father, Yahweh Bahasham, Yahweh Shai, Bahasham, Rachahakrash. Double honors to the apostles, the bishops, and the elders at Great Millstone who rule well. Peace and salutations, as always, to the elect. And this is going to be a prophecy update. All right, prophecy watch, as we are continuously watching this situation that is taking place in Western Asia. Okay, falsely called the Middle East, all right, by the colonizer, okay? And things are heating up. We see Esau Edom is pretty much not the hammer that he once was, and strategic moves are being made that are tied to biblical prophecy that are going to lead to his weakening, the economy collapsing here in the West eventually, all right, because it's going to take time, as this AI model of Professor Zhang is going to explain, all right. And what's happening is these particular guys like Professor Zhang and others who are going into, world events, they're setting up AI pages, and the information is still true, all right, but this is just another way for them to make money, all right, off of clicks, and people are just clicking these things, and they're just getting, some of these pages, they get $7,000 to $10,000 a month just based on AI models of themselves, giving information that they give in actual interviews, okay, and the information is legit. The talking points are legit for the most part. And we have sources and articles we can go into, but for the sake of time, I'm just gonna use this video here. As you can see, the petrodollar just collapsed. All right, now the petrodollar has not fully collapsed, but as you can see here, Iran's yuan oil shockwave, you see, and as we see the Strait of Hormuz, where they say about 20 to 30% of the world's oil flows through, was shut down, but it's been reopened, but only to nations outside of the United States and Israel. Okay, so as he's going to explain, Esau Edom, you see, the small hats in the West, even if they win, a physical war, take down regimes, which they haven't taken down the regime. There has not been a regime change. And you're not going to get a regime change in Iran, okay? It's basically just biblical prophecy. The Lord has this devil in a trick bag, okay? Pretty much, no matter what leader you bomb and take out via your technology, because they're using, Palantir and these various different technologies to find where particular leaders are and taking them out. But no matter what you do, the next leader is going to still have the same mindset as the one before him, okay? And pretty much, as we're going to get into, biblical prophecy is being fulfilled through this happening, okay? Because them shutting down the Strait of Hormuz, but opening it up to nations outside of the U.S. puts a strain on the petrodollar, all right, which was once dominant. So we're going to let him speak here, okay, and this goes directly into Habakkuk, the 2nd chapter. Lord willing, you're edified.
2 weeks into this conflict. 2 weeks into this conflict.
Give me 1 second here.
Iran delivered its most striking move. 2 weeks into this conflict, Iran delivered its most striking move yet. It wasn't a missile, a drone, or any conventional weapon. Instead, it was a single sentence from a senior Iranian official to CNN on a Saturday morning. Iran would allow oil tankers through the Strait of Hormuz, but only if the payments were made in Chinese yuan, not dollars. Just 4 words, yuan only. But they carry more impact than any explosion or strike over the past 14 days. This isn't a military maneuver. It's a direct challenge to the system that has placed the United States at the center of the global economy for half a century. Today,
because why has America been so dominant, okay, and these past years? Well, it's been the petrodollar. Okay, this is forced nations, as he's going to get into, to basically buy American debt. Okay, and in order to get oil using the dollar. All right, and he's going to go into it, but pretty much the force behind the dollar is what made it the powerhouse. Okay, which is the sword. Okay, it's not that the dollar itself is just this dominant, figure, but it's been the force behind the dollar, which has been the sword. And we've seen historically any nation that tried to operate outside of the dollar, all right, where propaganda was waged via the Western media, and they were invaded. Okay, sanctions, all right, because this devil has been able to weaponize the dollar, but everything is working against him in these times. It's not that the yuan is, more dominant than the dollar, all right, but moves are being made, all right, which go right into biblical prophecy, where the nations are no longer going to flow unto this devil. As a matter of fact, let's get that in the book of Jeremiah 51, one of my favorite scriptures, which is what we're witnessing. Jeremiah 51, all right, because the scriptures talks about the nations committing fornication with him. And one of the main ways that these nations have committed fornication with Babylon the Great is that dollar. This is the book of Jeremiah 51 and 44. And I will punish Baal and Babylon, because all of this, what they're doing via controlling trade and all of that, it all ties back to that ancient Canaanite priesthood, the control of, resources and trade by sea. Okay. But it says here, I will punish Baal and Babylon, and I will bring forth out of his mouth that which he have swallowed up, and the nations will not flow together any more unto him. Yea, the wall of Babylon shall fall. Okay, and that's eventually going to be physically. But what has been a great protection in a wall, okay, that protected Babylon, has been this petrodollar. The nations had a need, okay, to buy American debt so that they can buy oil, all right, which has ultimately been established to that dollar. Okay, remember in 1971, I believe, Nixon, he took gold from behind the dollar, all right, and oil became the new gold. Oil is what backs the dollar now. Oil is tied to the dollar. So nations were forced to tap into the dollar in order to get oil, because oil drives economies. Okay, but we're living at a time now where, just like what was happening in Venezuela, nations are figuring out ways to sell their oil and get oil around the US dollar. Okay?
We'll unpack what this statement really means, why it's far more significant than anything you've seen on TV, and what could happen globally if this approach spreads. When people hear petrodollar, many tune out. It sounds technical, abstract, or like something discussed in boardrooms far from the battlefield. But here's the truth. The petrodollar system is why America can project military power across the world. It's why the US can run deficits that would sink almost any other nation. Despite trillions spent on wars, debt, and global operations, the dollar remains the currency every country needs to hold.
And this is how America is not affected by a lot of the moves that they've made worldwide. All right, Europe is already being affected by some of the things that are happening, but because of the strength of the American dollar via the petroleum, right, things don't hit Americans, and you've been able to sit comfortably over here in America. You're not used to, hard times and things straining your economy like it would strain, Eastern and, Euro countries. See that? But the chickens are coming home to roost. The scriptures talks about how his own doings will eventually come up on his own head. The snare he laid, he's now being hit by. He was used to being able to sanction nations using that dollar, right? And Russia showed you that in spite of sanctions, we can still operate and win. And nations have been taking very, 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 taking heed to what's been happening. You see? Now his ass is being sanctioned. So he's in his own trap that he set. He's now being snared by it.
Disrupt or seriously weaken that system, and the financial bedrock of American power begins to shake. And with this announcement, Iran just hurled a stone at that foundation. To see why this matters, we need to go back to 1971. Before then, every dollar was tied to gold. Each note in circulation could, at least theoretically, be exchanged for gold stored in U.S. vaults. Nations trusted the dollar because of that guarantee. But when President Richard Nixon ended the gold standard, the dollar faced a question it had never encountered: why should anyone trust it? The answer came from the Middle East. In 1974, the United States made a deal with Saudi Arabia. The kingdom agreed to price all its oil sales in U.S. dollars. In exchange, America promised military protection. OPEC followed suit, nation by nation, and the world oil market became dollar-denominated. The result was extraordinary.
So the oil market became dollar-dominated through America, and we've been going into that in the News and Prophecies, and various brothers have been going into it, making a deal with the Saudis and different, countries, all right, that basically we will protect you. Just let us set up a U.S. base in your country, and we will protect you as long as you only trade your oil in dollars. And this is how America has been able to sit on a high horse, okay, and force nations into the dollar system and then sanction them. See? Put sanctions on them. See, they weaponize the dollar. Sanctions is just one way, but sanctions is something we constantly see in the news. This is because nations have been forced, all right, in this prophecy that they had to deal with the dollar. They had to buy American debt. See? This is why you Americans have been able to have so much comfort. Okay? This man took an empty dollar backed by nothing and made it the #1 currency worldwide, which is what? Babylonian magic. Some of you can look up. There was a currency in ancient Babylon called magic money that kind of mimics what we're seeing here today. Babylonian magic money. I did a lesson on it some years ago, but I mean that which is then is now, okay?
Suddenly, every country that needed oil, which was every country, had to hold U.S. dollars. Japan needed dollars, China needed dollars, India, Germany, Brazil, all industrial nations had to maintain dollar reserves to keep their energy flowing. This arrangement created a permanent structural demand for the U.S. dollar. That demand allowed America to borrow without limits, spend endlessly, and maintain a global military presence that no other country could match. The petrodollar is far more than an economic deal. It's the backbone of American global power. And for 52 years, it has endured, because every attempt to challenge it has been crushed. Iran is not the first to test this system. In 2000, Saddam Hussein tried moving Iraq's oil sales from dollars to euros. 3 years later, the US invaded, and Iraq's oil returned to dollar pricing. Muammar Gaddafi suggested a gold-backed pan-African currency for oil trade. In 2011, NATO intervened in Libya, Gaddafi was killed, and the plan died with him. Venezuela, under Nicolas Maduro, pushed oil trade outside the dollar and strengthened ties with China. In January 2026, the US moved against him as well. Analysts call this pattern the petrodollar war theory. The idea that countries challenging dollar-based oil pricing face consequences far beyond normal diplomacy. Now, Iran, a country the US has been bombing for 14 days, has announced it will reopen the Strait of Hormuz.
And historically, Iran has been pretty much one of the most sanctioned countries we know of. They've underwent all manner of hell at the head of the West. Remember, they set up the Shah, over there. Just they and they finally got control back of their country. All right, and as you can see, the U.S. headed by the small hat, the least of the flock, is being drawn into conflict with them to get control over there, to set up, a Rothschild-controlled central bank, right? And this is what's going to lead to the war that ends all. All right, because this is a part of the Greater Israel Project where they want control over this whole region in order to set up a pseudo birthright, right? And proclaim themselves as the chosen heading into this new world order. Okay, which again, all of these nations agree with the MOTB infrastructure and system, right? But they don't agree, all right, on a lot, which is going to lead to a war.
But only under conditions that bypass the dollar entirely. This is deliberate. A senior Iranian official told CNN that Iran is considering allowing a limited number of oil tankers to transit the strait if the payments are made in Chinese yuan. Notice what this means. Iran isn't just reopening Hormuz. It's reopening it on new financial terms. Terms that exclude the dollar, favor China, and set a precedent never seen in the 52-year history of the petrodollar system. The Revolutionary Guard Navy has already started issuing what analysts call IRGC certificates, permits allowing ships to pass. Iran controls the valve, and now it controls which currency you must use to open it. For China, this is huge. Beijing has spent years trying to expand the yuan's role in global oil trade through yuan-denominated futures on the Shanghai Exchange, swap lines with dozens of countries and other measures.
Let's rewind that.
And Iraq's oil returned to dollar pricing. Muammar Gaddafi suggested a gold-backed pan-African currency.
Saddam Hussein, all right, the Western media was used to paint him as this monster because what? He was trying to operate outside of the dollar. Libya with Gaddafi, all right, he tried to operate outside of the dollar. The U.S. media painted him as this monster, all right, boom. Maduro, okay, he was over there trading with China and Russia outside of the dollar, right? And boom, they painted him as a, drug trafficking monster. Went over there and grabbed him up, which was very weird, right? And we see the pattern here. Now we're witnessing Iran have the upper hand outside of being a lesser nation, military-wise. All right, they hold the control of a very, 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 very strategic point. And this is why he wants control of what they call the Middle East, right? Because to control that region, right, is pretty much to control trade, all right, to control resources. See? And now we're starting to see his sword, right? Though he has the dominant sword on paper, all right, strategic areas where these different, Muslim and some of them are Arab nations rule, all right, which these nations at one point would have never stood up to Babylon the Great. But now, as we see, alliances are being made to operate outside of his power.
For oil trade. In 2011, NATO intervened in Libya, Gaddafi was killed, and the plan died with him. Venezuela, under Nicolas Maduro, pushed oil trade outside the dollar and strengthened ties with China. In January 2026, the US moved against him as well. Analysts call this pattern the petrodollar war theory. The idea that countries challenging dollar-based oil pricing face consequences far beyond normal diplomacy. Now, Iran, a country the US has been bombing for 14 days, has announced it will reopen the Strait of Hormuz, but only under conditions that bypass the dollar entirely. This is deliberate. A senior Iranian official told CNN that Iran is considering allowing a limited number of oil tankers to transit the strait if the payments are made in Chinese yuan. Notice what this means. Iran isn't just reopening Hormuz. It's reopening it on new financial terms. Terms that exclude the dollar, favor China, and set a precedent never seen in the 52-year history of the petrodollar system. The Revolutionary Guard Navy has already started issuing what analysts call IRGC certificates, permits allowing ships to pass. Iran controls the valve, and now it controls which currency you must use to open it. For China, this is huge. Beijing has spent years trying to expand the yuan's role in global oil trade through yuan-denominated futures on the Shanghai Exchange, swap lines with dozens of countries and other measures. All of it has been building toward a moment like this, a major oil choke point operating in yuan, not dollars. With Hormuz partially closed and oil above $100 a barrel, countries that rely on that oil face a tough choice. Wait for the US to reopen the strait on dollar terms or quietly accept Iran's yuan condition and keep their oil flowing. Some are...
So, let's get the scripture in the book of Habakkuk. Okay? And because of his, dollar dominance and, that sword that backed it, he's waxed proud. It looked as though there would never be a way around this devil and his, this because of these alliances he's made. Now the very Arab nations or Muslim nations that he's, made deals with to, trade their oil in dollars are being attacked by Iran because they have U.S. bases in their country. So what we're getting ready to see is nations move away from Babylon the Great. All right. And the small hat is going to be the very reason. Okay, your U.S. government has been hijacked by the Zionist state of Israel. This is their bidding. This is their doing. This is what they want. Okay? Habakkuk 2:4, behold, his soul which is lifted up is not upright in him, but the just shall live by faith. See, look at the proud. They trust in themselves. Their lives are crooked, but the righteous will live by their faithfulness to the Most High, because the moves that he's making is going to eventually affect our everyday lives, affect the American economy. And this is what the elite want, so that ultimately they, out of chaos, they can establish their order. Yea, also because he transgresseth by wine, his philosophy. He is a proud man, neither keepeth at home. He's all over the world doing his wickedness, man. Who enlargeth his desire as hell. He is as death and cannot be satisfied. He cannot be satisfied. Okay, and Amalek is at the forefront of this. Okay, those small hats. But gathereth unto him all nations and heapeth unto him all people. And through that petrodollar, all right, he's been able to have pretty much all of the nations in the world under his grip, under his control. Then he can put a sanction on you. And when you deal with sanctions, as the priest Ayashimath was going into, sanctions are responsible for mass amounts of death. Okay? Sanctions lead to death primarily by triggering economic collapse, which severely restricts civilian access to food, clean water, and essential medicines. Okay? These measures often destroy healthcare infrastructure and create shortages of medical equipment, causes spikes in infant, maternal, and chronic illnesses. So sanctions lead to mass death. Okay? So he doesn't have to physically bomb you to be violent towards you. He can just put a sanction on you. Okay? And as the brother typed in, okay, let's see here. It says, including this 2025 study, primarily sanctions primarily imposed by the U.S. and the EU are associated with over 500,000 of excess deaths each year. See that? From 1970 to 2021, all right, approximately 38 million deaths have been caused over that period via sanctions. Okay, and then they'll go over to these countries and show you these motherfuckers hungry, heads growing, stomachs growing, all right, and tell you for a penny a day you can help to feed this nigga when that nigga can't even digest bread. Hurt. Okay? And half of the victims are children. Okay? Economic sanctions cause mortality rates similar to that of war. So this man, right, is as death and cannot be satisfied. But somehow he's the good guy. Somehow he's the victim when you talk about it. See? But gathereth unto him all nations and heapeth unto him all people. See? Shall not all these take up a parable against him and a taunting proverb against him, and say, woe to him that increaseth in that which is not his? How long to him that ladeth himself with thick clay? And through that thick clay, which is debt, which that speaks 100% to the US dollar, it's a debt-based currency. Thick clay is debt. Ibatya, debt, heavy debts. So he's laded himself. That dollar, that petrodollar system has put him on the forefront as the man. He's laded himself with thick clay, and nations have been forced to commit fornication with him and live on a high horse, all right, the heads of these countries, because it doesn't benefit the people of these countries, but the heads of these countries have been able to sit on a high horse and win with the whore. See? But everything is coming up to bite this devil in the ass, man. Okay? Job, the 18th chapter, right? Job 18. Okay? see here. Job 18 and 10. The snare is laid for him on every side. On the ground, a trap for him in the way. Terror shall make him afraid on every side and shall drive him to his feet. And as you can see, the U.S. is not used to someone, one, fighting back, but another challenging that dollar without the fear of being sanctioned and bombed. Because Iran has nothing to lose. See? At the end of the day, they've been the victim of sanctions and war for years, effing with this devil. See? And these U.S. troops, they don't want to be in this war. They want to get back home, get a beer, go to the bar, and watch March Madness. See? But see, now you devils are worried. Things ain't going in the same direction as it has usually went for the whore. Okay? The hammer.
Deciding. India has received assurances from Iran's ambassador for safe passage and is weighing yuan payments to secure energy. Turkey faces the same calculation. Gulf states are diverting oil through alternative pipelines, but those pipelines max out at about 2.6 million barrels per day, while Hormuz normally carries 20 million. That leaves a daily deficit of roughly 12 million barrels. That deficit gives Iran enormous leverage. Every week, Hormuz remains partially closed. Countries across Asia feel the squeeze, and the yuan alternative grows more attractive. Meanwhile, China is already buying 90% of Iran's oil through shadow networks via Malaysia, Singapore, and Vietnam to bypass sanctions. The financial framework for yuan-denominated Iranian oil is already in place. Iran isn't proposing something brand new. It's making something that has long operated in the shadows into an open, large-scale system through the world's most vital waterway. So what does this mean for America? The short answer, the U.S. cannot bomb its way out of this problem. Airstrikes can destroy facilities, eliminate generals, or flatten infrastructure, but they cannot stop China from buying oil in Iran. They cannot prevent India from quietly weighing financial choices. And once a precedent is set in global energy markets, it cannot simply be erased. The dollar's dominance in oil trade isn't upheld by aircraft carriers alone. It's reinforced by habit, trust, and the lack of a viable alternative. Iran, working closely with China, is now actively creating that alternative. Not by defeating the US militarily, but by offering the world a solution that makes sense when the Strait of Hormuz is partially closed and energy is urgently needed. Oil prices are already up 47% in just 15 days.
Checkmate. We'll be back with more.